Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah, wa ba'd. So moving on to the second Umayyad era, or the second Umayyi era, which is from the year 86 to 132 Hijri. The reason why we consider it to be a second era is because in the first era we saw a civil war. And that's known as the second civil war, or the second fitna. When Abdullah ibn Zubayr was, fighting against the Umayyad Khalifa, that's known as the civil war. So now that the civil war is over, not a very good way of it being over, but it's over, we're going to see a change in what happens in Islam when Muslims are not at war with each other on a constant basis. So now we take a look at this era where Al-Walid, the son of Abdul Malik, is put into power. Okay, so he's put into power. Now the circumstances have changed because there's no civil war at this time. No one else is claiming to be the Khalifa on a major scale. And he was the first son who's been appointed in his position where nobody is contesting him openly. Right? Because every other child that was put into a position of authority, they were being contested by somebody. Right? Either by Hussein or by Abdullah ibn Zubayr or somebody else. Now there is no contest. So there is a sense of unity throughout the Muslim world at this time. So there's not much internal feud. There's not much rebelling going on during his time. So he had the opportunity to focus on a lot of things, particularly on public works. So among the things, because it was a time of peace, among the things that he was able to do was he started building new roads throughout the Muslim world. He opened up new schools in cities as well as in villages so that people in the villages could also study. He began digging wells. He began making canals. He started making hospitals actually during this time. Not the most advanced hospitals yet, but still hospitals for people to get medical treatment there, or at least to be quarantined. He started building shelters for the poor people. And he fixed welfare allowances for the poor, so he started giving them a specific amount of money. And he set stipends for scholars, all coming from the public treasury. So he's doing a lot of good public works. Even though he's not the most amazing of individuals, he's still doing a lot of good things. Because he has to do something. Even if you're not the greatest of people, and Allah knows what's in his heart, even if you're not the greatest of people, if you don't have to deal with internal rebellions, and you got to do something as leader, right? To show that you're doing at least something. So instead of fighting, he was doing a lot of internal public works for people. Among the good things that he did was he appointed a man by the name of Umar ibn Abdul Aziz to the post of governor over Medina. So this man, he took charge, he became the governor of Medina. Now who was the governor of Medina prior to this? Governor of Medina and Mecca in this area? Hajjaj, the tyrant guy. So now he puts this guy into power, Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, to kind of undo some of the damage that has already been done in Medina. And this is a very righteous man. He's a very good man. So during his time, he did a lot of things. He expanded the masjid of the Prophet, peace be upon him, in Medina. He ruled as a governor over Medina by appointing a body of 10 scholars, and he would always consult those scholars before making any decision. So he's showing a different model and a very good model of how to actually govern a region, especially a very important region like the city of Medina. So the people were actually very happy about Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, and they used to send letters of thanks to the Khalifa. So they were sending, where's the Khalifa by the way? Damascus. So they're sending letters of thanks and saying, with Hajjaj it was horrible. This guy is really good. We're very happy with him. Which is a very good lesson. Because if you want somebody to remain, somebody's doing a good job, and you want them to remain in a position of authority, you have to kind of give them some support. By, instead of just staying quiet, and we say we only complain when there's a problem, but we don't actually do anything when something good is happening. This is an attitude which is not going to yield much fruit. And unfortunately, some people take this attitude. So whenever something is going wrong, there's a problem somewhere in an Islamic institution or Islamic center, they start complaining. This is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong. When nothing is wrong, then they're quiet. But they don't actually, give any positive feedback. you know what, this is a great program that took place. This was a nice khutbah. This is a good speaker. This is a good, president. This is a good whatever. And what happens is, if you only complain and you don't actually put any positive feedback, imagine what the results are going to be. People are going to say, well, no one ever says anything good either. They only complain. So who's going to take these people's advice into consideration anyways? Their opinion is not that important. So that actually helped quite a bit. So Umar remained in power over Medina for a very long time. Although governors usually did not last too long, depending on what kind of Khalifa was ruling. Umar stayed in power for quite a while, an entire decade in Medina, governing that region because the people were supporting him. But at the same time, because he's a just person, he began to complain about certain policies which he thought were wrong. So he's not just a puppet, trying to maintain himself in a government which may not be the ideal government. So he's in a very important political position, but it doesn't mean that he's silent over some atrocities or injustices that he sees. So who did he start criticizing? The first person he started criticizing was Hajjaj, who's still in power, not over Medina now, but he's in power over the region of Iraq at the moment. So he starts criticizing about the harshness of Hajjaj to the Khalifa, and saying, this Hajjaj guy, he's a problem, we need to do something about it. Now Hajjaj is very clever as well. So he found out that Umar is complaining about him. So what does he do? He files a counter complaint to the Khalifa, and he says, this Umar guy is a problem. He's too soft, he's too lenient, and I'm trying to deal with all these, you've already seen what kind of stuff has come out of Iraq. People of Kufa revolting, people of Basra revolting, supporting, Hussein, and supporting this Mukhtar guy, and supporting all these other people. And all these troublemakers in Iraq, guess where they go? They go to Medina because they see that Umar is a softie. Even though he was not a soft person, he was not a softie person, but that was the counter complaint that he waged. So what ended up happening? You have these decision that the Khalif has to make. What decision did he make? He deposed Umar. So Umar was removed, but he served an entire decade as the governor of Medina, but then he was removed. So once he was removed from his position, some people may think that, this is really unfortunate. We finally got a very righteous person who's a great role model, doing a great job, and then he's removed. Well, to make matters worse, he actually openly opposed one of the Khalifa's decisions on a decision that he was making, and he was actually imprisoned and thrown into jail. And he stayed in jail for 3 years. Okay, so you have to understand that sometimes there are good people and they're doing great things, and they happen for a while, and it shows you that, look, there's a great example where we can have justice among leadership. But it's not always going to remain constantly that way. And there's going to be ups and there's going to be downs. So now you see Umar was doing a great job, and then there was a down. And then from the down, it became even more down. He was in prison. But we're going to see what happens to him in the future. Okay? So, moving on to another side. During this time, for a long time now, since the time of Umar, the first Umar radiallahu anh, may Allah be pleased with him, Muslim merchants had been sailing into the east all the way to India, parts of China, Sri Lanka, all these different areas in the east. And they actually had very good relationships, particularly with the people of Sri Lanka and some of these further regions. Now, the area of Sindh, let me see how far the map is. Okay, the map is a little bit far, but I'll explain it to you on a map a little bit later. So, the region of Sindh, which is the western part of India, right, or the kind of southern part of India, this region, Pakistan, this region, basically, it was taken over during either the time of Umar or during the time of Uthman. We talked about the area of Makran, right, which is Balochistan and the region a little bit past that. So that means Muslims were there at that time in the area of Balochistan. What happened was, after a while, after some of the internal feuds that we've been seeing, Muslims lost that territory. And they lost it to the king of Sindh, who's named Raja Dahir. They lost this area of Makran to a guy named Raja Dahir, who was the king of Sindh, the king of this entire area. So obviously relations with him are not very good. But when Muslims used to sail further east down to Sri Lanka, they had very good relationship with the people over there. So what happened was, merchants are going, traveling in and out. They're not only remaining within the Muslim territories. They're going outside and they're trading, and there's, a trade going on with different people. So what happened was, the relationship with him was not so good. And it got even worse in the year 92 AH. So what had happened in 92 AH is that a civilian ship was trading in Sri Lanka and was on its way back to the Muslim area. And it got intercepted by the people of Sindh and it was attacked. All their possessions were plundered, stolen, and people were imprisoned. Now the question is, who is responsible in the Muslim area to deal with this? It's the person who's going to be in control of the eastern region, because the Muslim empire now is too large. So the Khalifa used to have different people in control. We had one person in control of the west, one person in control of the east. So who is responsible and in charge of the eastern region? It's Hajjaj at this time. It's Hajjaj. Despite despite the type of person he is, he still has a responsibility to manage and take care of that. He still has this pride about Islam, whether he's a good person or a bad person. He goes and he sends a letter to this Raja, and he says, the ship that you just plundered, that was a Muslim ship, and you don't mess with the Muslims. So you need to release those Muslim prisoners, and these were like women, children. These were not we're not talking about soldiers. These are civilians. So he said, you need to release all of them immediately. So the Raja, he writes back and he's like, whatever. You don't tell us what to do. We don't care about you. So the Raja gave him a very cold answer. So Hajjaj decided it's time to go and attack this king of Sindh. So he sent an army, and the army has to go through Makran in order to get through Sindh again. So he sends the first army. The first army goes into, now keep in mind, the modern day region of Pakistan is on the west or the east? On the west, right? So the Muslims are here. What is to the west of Pakistan? Iran, which is where the Muslims are established, right? So they had Makran in this, in this region, but they had lost that too. So now they need to travel from this region of Iran, where Muslims are controlled and Hajjaj is in control over, and they need to travel through in order to get to the area of Sindh, in order to get the Muslim prisoners, and in order to, punish the king for, bad relationship with the Muslims. So what happens? He sends the first army. The first army is defeated. So they weren't able to do anything. He sends a second army. The second army is also defeated. So then he decides he's going to send his nephew, who was Muhammad ibn al-Qasim al-Thaqafi. And he was only 17 years old. So Muhammad ibn al-Qasim, 17 years old at that time. This time Hajjaj says, we're not just going to give you a normal army that comes out of Iraq. We're going to give you a specially trained army from Damascus. So we're going to give you the soldiers from that region. And they sent them. And he sent them well prepared, actually. So he sent them with catapults. Initially, the first two armies, we don't know exactly what they had, but they didn't have maybe that much, weaponry. So he sent him with catapults, and actually Muslims were using modified catapults at this time. So what is a catapult? A catapult is this giant machine which can basically hurl projectiles at a pretty long distance with a lot of velocity. That can break down a fortress. Every army at that time, or every city that was fortified, had, they built their forts with, bricks really strong. It's very difficult to, get into a fortress. So if you have a catapult though, you can literally launch a projectile and you hit the wall and you break down the walls, you break down the army's defenses, and that's it. There's really not much they can do. Before the Arabs or the Muslims had catapults, what did they used to do? All they could do is surround the city and just wait until their supplies run out. That takes a very long time. It could take a year, it could take 2 years. It's a very long time. But with the catapult technology, they can do a lot more. Now, where did they learn catapults from? They learned it from the Chinese. So the Chinese had been using catapults, the Romans too. They've been using catapults for a very long time. So the Muslims actually adopted the Chinese model of catapults. But they adapted it, and they modified it, and they actually improved upon the technology. So they're not just people who steal the technology and just copy it. They're people who constantly improve. So they made two main improvements. I just thought this was interesting. They added wheels. Now obviously not wheels to move the catapult. Wheels so that when you launch the catapult, it actually moves when it's being launched. That gives it an increased range. And the second thing they did was they added a counterweight to it. So when there's a weight going on the opposite side, so when you're launching it this way, you add a counterweight so it goes the opposite direction, it fires even further. So now they had further range and more powerful catapults. So Muhammad ibn Qasim was one of the people who went over there. and he was successful. So he went through Makran, he pounded through the forts at Debal, or Debal, I don't know how to pronounce it. Does anyone know where this is? This is near Karachi. Huh? Dibal. So is it still a city today? Tiny little region? Yeah, tiny little region. This is like near modern day Karachi. Okay, so this is where he was at the age of 17, commanding this army. So they defeated the Hindu king. They defeated this Raja. And then he moved north and he moved east through the entire region of what's known as modern day Pakistan, what's called the region of Sindh, which is in the south, and then the region of Punjab, which is in the northeast region. So he didn't take the entire Punjab, but he took quite a bit of it. Now what happened after they had taken this region? Who was living there? Hindus and Buddhists were primarily the citizens of this area. So what happened was the Muslim scholars were thinking, okay, well, we've not encountered too many of these people. So what do we do with them exactly? So they decided they're going to be treated exactly like Jews and Christians in the sense that they are zimmis, they are non-Muslim citizens of the Islamic State. But what do we do with their temples? Because they were worshipping their statues inside the temples and all of that. So what do we do with their temples? He says, okay, we're going to apply analogy and we're going to say their temples are like churches. So therefore they are also going to be protected. Right? A lot of people have this idea that Muslims, they were following, Prophet Ibrahim and they just started breaking everything down everywhere they went. That's not the reality. Because Prophet Ibrahim's situation of the story of breaking the idols was an exception. And the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, when he was breaking the idols as well in Arabia, was an exception. Because in Arabia, the people declared that they had accepted Islam. So if you declare that you accepted Islam, you can't just keep your idols and then say that you're Muslim at the same time. It's not going to work. So here, their temples were likened to churches and they were able to maintain them as well. So people were, it was not like a major loss for them in terms of their religion. Muslims later on, a while later, they're going to appropriate mathematics and astronomy from Indian civilization and they're going to be learning, several other things. So here's a map. So this will explain a little bit better. So we're talking about this area, right? This is Basra, this is Kufa, north here. So we're talking about coming from Basra and Kufa, armies coming through here, north, this southern region. This is Makran, this area right here, moving all the way up through modern day Karachi, and then moving all the way up through this entire region here, taking most of this right here. So they're already on the outskirts of India, right? Muslims already controlled most of Afghanistan anyways. Iran here, this area was already there. Azerbaijan, Armenia, all this region. So as we saw in the previous classes. That's the region to the east. Around the same time, in the year 92, we have a lot of developments in Central Asia. So in Central Asia, you have a military general by the name of Qutayba ibn Muslim. He was assigned command of the northeastern military, region. So he moved into Central Asia. Now Central Asia, what is Central Asia? Most people don't know what Central Asia is because today it's not considered to be that important. But in the past, this was a very important region. And we're talking about this entire region over here. This is Central Asia, this whole region over here. Okay, all the stans basically today. Right? So this became a very important place because a lot of scholars came out of there, a lot of sciences, a lot of learning and knowledge came out of there, and other things. So Qutayba ibn Muslim goes into Central Asia, and in a small amount of time, he reconquers the entire area of Khorasan, which is Afghanistan, which the Muslims had, but then they lost. Keep in mind that we only talked about expansion, we didn't talk about loss. All these internal conflicts that are going on, they're not just internal conflicts going on. If you're focusing on these things, you're losing all the places where you had already reached. So now all these places are at the borders of the Muslim empire. They're being taken back. So he reconquered the entire area of Khorasan, which is like Afghanistan and other parts. The entire region of Transoxiana. This is a very important region. It's called, since Alexander the Great, it's called Transoxiana. Muslims call it Ma Wara al-Nahr. What is behind the river? So there was a river there, a very important river, and they said whatever is behind this river, that's what we're going to call this region. So this is Transoxiana, a very important region in history. And this Qutayba, he made it all the way to Kashgar in China. So we're talking about, massive expansion reaching from these areas. From China, what are the Muslims going to learn? They learned manufacture of silk, manufacture of paper, which is one of the most important things we're going to be talking about today. And later on, quite a bit later, they're going to learn gunpowder from this region as well. So this is in the Central Asia, in the northeast region. So what's happening so this, you can see Afghanistan, this entire area, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, all the way on the borders of China. This is China right here, on the borders of China around this area. And China actually had armies in Central Asia as well. Okay, so this entire region here is opening up to the Muslims. Now what happened in the West? In the Western region, and when we say West, we're talking about Western Africa and beyond, right? Because that's considered the western part of the Muslim world. Musa ibn Nusayr was the military commander there. And he set up his headquarters in Qayrawan. Where is Qayrawan? Tunisia, right? So in Tunisia, he set up his headquarters. And he started moving west, retaking all the lost territories. So remember we talked about a guy also named Musa. His name was Musa ibn Uqba. He is the guy who reached this region. He hit the sea, and what did he say? He said, oh Allah, I would have kept on going. Right? What happened? He ended up dying. We talked about how he ended up getting betrayed by Romans and Berbers, and he died. Now Musa ibn Nusayr is the new guy. But what happened was, all the internal fighting since that time, right? We didn't talk about this for a while. What happens? When you have internal problems, this entire region was retaken back, and they lost all this region again. So what does Musa ibn Nusayr do? He goes and he retakes this entire area all the way back to the modern day Morocco. So once he's retaken this region, what happens? So now that he's back there, Muslims are already in Morocco, just across a small strait to Spain. Now, do the Muslims have any interest in going into Europe and going into Spain? Absolutely not. There's nothing in Spain. And European historians will say the same thing. There was really nothing to take in Spain because, one, there's not a lot of wealth. Number two, there's not really much of a civilization there anyways. The Romans do not control Spain. So the Roman Empire, this was not part of their region either. So who controls this region, and why didn't the Muslims really care about this region? Because the people who ruled this region were known as the Visigoths or the Goths. When we talk about Gothic art and people dressing up with black and Goths and all that, that's where it comes from. So the Visigoths have actually taken this entire region of Spain, part of France, Portugal, what's known as the Iberian Peninsula. Okay, that's the historical name for it, the Iberian Peninsula. So it was conquered by the Visigoths, and the capital of this region was Toledo. Okay, kind of a little bit northern region of Spain. That was their capital. Now, these people were basically like barbarians, right? These are like Viking, they're Germanic people. They speak Germanic languages. But they're considered to be, by most people, they're just like very nomadic, barbarian type people. They don't really have much civilization. They don't have much literature. They don't have poetry. They don't have much, generally what we consider to be civilization. So in the 6th century, the Visigoths actually invited the Latin church from the Roman Empire into Spain. And they said, you know what, you help us manage this area. So you set up the church over here. So that means that even though the region is controlled by the Visigoths, the entire region became Christian. Because they invited all the missionaries and they invited all the people to come in and set up their churches over. And the Christians and the Visigoths ruled the area together. So they had the religious rule and the Visigoths had the political rule. The problem with that was, you also have double taxation. Because you have to understand, the church, you have to pay a tithe. Right? It's not like Islam where you don't have, there's a donation box. And if you feel like giving, you give. Otherwise you have the, council members, begging asking, please give something every Friday. Here in the church, you have to give a certain percentage of your wealth. So they're getting taxed by the church, and they're also getting taxed by the Visigoths. Now the problem is the church was not a very, nor were the Visigoths, very tolerant people. So the people who are not the dominant religion, they're going to be persecuted the most. And under that system that they had, the people who are the lower class, they're going to get highly persecuted as well. Right? So who receives the most persecution? Either the peasants, who are at the lowest level, or the Jews. Because the Jews were not allowed to openly practice their religion. They were living in a miserable condition. Jews are not allowed to own any land. Right? They're not allowed to really have any position over there. Because keep in mind, the historical position of Christianity has been that the Jews killed Jesus. That's what they believe, and there's been a lot of persecution of Jews since that time. So this is what the Jews were living under. So what happened was, to make a long story short, in the year 92, one of the local leaders named Count Julian, he sent his daughter. People are obviously internally, some people are obviously upset with what's going on. They're not going to be the happiest of people if some people have a sense of justice. But Count Julian, something happened in his life that really made him had it. So he sent his daughter to the capital, Toledo, in order to go and visit the king. And there was some royal festivities going on, and he's an important person. So his daughter actually got raped by the king Roderick over there. And then Julian just decided, that's it. I've had enough of this Roderick guy. He's a tyrant. We need to get rid of him. So what does he do? He's sick and tired of the oppression. Where does he get this idea from? Right? Muslims are in this region of Morocco now, right? So Muslims are in this region of Morocco. There are Jews living there, and there are Christians from the Roman Empire living there as well, and there are Berbers living there as well. Some who have accepted Islam, some who have not accepted Islam. And he saw that he's obviously getting reports, what kind of lives do these people live? And he says, these people live very good lives. Jews are allowed to practice their religion. Christians can practice their religion. The Berbers can practice their religion. Why can't we have something like this? This is ridiculous. What's going on? So he decides, what? Even though I'm from the same people, I would rather have somebody like a Muslim taking over this area than a guy like Roderick. Some people say that, he just wanted to team up with the Muslims to foster his own rule. But why would you go all the way and risk, your entire area to an entire empire, the Muslim empire? So it's pretty probable that the guy had an understanding that we need some change over here. So he travels all the way to the capital of Musa, which is Qayrawan in Tunisia. He travels over there and he convinced Musa ibn Nusayr to invade Spain. And he says, you need to come, and this is what's going on over here, and you should really do it. Now, do the Muslims really have a good reason to go into this region? Not really. Like I said before, this is not the most attractive region. Weather-wise, it's bad. It's considered to be not the greatest of regions. It's actually disconnected from the rest of the Muslim world by sea, so it's not a very strategic point in terms of communication, in terms of safety. This is not a very safe voyage either. But regardless, Musa is convinced. So Musa decides, okay, we're going to go in. So what he did was, he took his freed Berber slave, whose name was Tariq ibn Ziyad, and he sent him to go and lead this expedition. Now what does that tell you? Let's talk about the Berber people. The Berber people, and there are some Berbers who don't like to call themselves Berber, but I looked into it actually. There's nothing intrinsically wrong with the term. In fact, it existed before the word barbarian and all of that stuff. So it's not directly connected with that. They're fine with the word Berber, right? Yeah. I lived in France, so there's a lot of Berbers there. And some of them said, you shouldn't be using that word, but it's fine. So anyways, these were the people who were being controlled by the Roman Empire in North Africa. So for a time, up until this time, many of them, when the Muslims had taken over, they had not accepted Islam, or they had not fully accepted Islam sincerely. So they were sometimes teaming up with the Roman Empire, or sometimes they were rebelling against Muslim rule, and they were trying to overthrow the Muslim region. Around this time, many of the Berber uprisings had stopped, and a lot of the Berbers had accepted Islam, including somebody like Tariq ibn Ziyad. Right, so keep in mind, when we talk about, slave and slavery and, why are these people being taken over and, why is there so much war and, we have this, I keep alluding to this concept of, why couldn't they just, give a dawah pamphlet over to, the Berber people or something like that. understand the reality of the world, but this gives you a little bit more clarity. So the thing is, a person like Tariq ibn Ziyad, right, who's a Berber slave, means that he was not a Muslim, or maybe his parents perhaps, whatever it was, and the Muslims came, he or some of his other people fought against the Muslims. They lost, and therefore they were taken as prisoners of war. Now he's accepted Islam, he's been liberated, he's not a slave anymore, and he was actually promoted to the position of the governor of Tangier. So he's the governor of the entire region of this Morocco region. So I mean, this shows you what Islam can do for even people who are coming from foreign lands. And we're not talking about Arab superiority complex or something like that. I keep reading in books when I'm going through Umayyad history. Arab superiority, they didn't allow anyone else to be a leader. I don't understand how, how Tariq ibn Ziyad, who's a Berber, how has some kind of lineage back to the Quraysh tribe or something like that. Maybe perhaps through some random blood or something like that. But technically, it gives you an example of what kind of people were being put into power. So what did Tariq do? Tariq was appointed. So he sailed over with his army through the Straits of Gibraltar. And by the way, Gibraltar is named after him. So Jabal Tariq means the mountain of Tariq. Jabal Tariq turned into Gibraltar. These things change that way. That's just the way it works in Latin and other words. So he sailed over and he faced this massive army of Roderick. Roderick had like 100,000 soldiers, and Tariq ibn Ziyad had like under 20,000. So even by Western historians, European historians, they say that this was one of the greatest battles or greatest victories in the history of the world in terms of the numbers that the Muslims had, number one, and number two, in terms of the long-term and long-reaching effects that this battle had. It was a very, very important move. So the battle is known as the Battle of Guadalete. All right, hopefully, however that's pronounced. He defeated the King Roderick in this battle. And within a year, he kept on moving through the entire region of Spain. So within a year, he took Cordoba, he took Murcia, he took Saragossa, he took Toledo, the capital, and there was nothing left in Toledo when he got there. Everyone, ran away basically. So there was really no fight taking place in Toledo, and he took most of the entire peninsula. The only parts or the only cities in Spain, and we're talking about the whole region in 1 year, the only parts that he didn't take were the heavily fortified cities. And he left those because he didn't have so many catapults with him. So he said, let's take whatever we can take. Let's, get these entire regions opened up, and we'll see what happens afterwards. 1 year later, Musa ibn Nusayr, he comes himself with reinforcements, with catapults. So then they go and they take the rest of these cities. And these are very important cities. Sevilla, Madrid, Barcelona, and he took the entire region of Portugal. So the entire Iberian Peninsula pretty much was taken within like a year and a half or so. Very, very small period of time. And only a few years later, the Muslims would continue to move up all the way through southern France, all the way up to central France, in the region, even hitting up to the city of Autun. Right? Has anyone heard of the city of Autun before? No one. Right? The reason is, people say, Autun, there's nothing special about Autun. For me, personally, it's a very important city, even though it's a very small town. It's because this is where I studied for 3 years and I lived there. And no one told me that Muslims were actually in this city. So this is where we used to go when our internet connection died. But the thing is just to know that you're sitting in France and you're getting kicked out of a restaurant, because there's racism going on and you're Muslim, we don't want you in our store and all that. To know that Muslims were right here in this city, it changes things. I wish I would have known as well. It would have been nice to share with the people who kicked us out. But anyways, it's very interesting. So it means they reached all the way up to central France at this time. Now, about 50 years later or so, they would make it all the way to Switzerland, Lake Geneva and these areas. But we're not there yet right now. This entire region was taken by the Muslims. All the way up to, who was happy? The Jews were very happy, and the peasants in Spain were very, very happy, and they welcomed the Muslims with open arms. The serfdom, so the idea of being like a serf, like a peasant, there's this hierarchy. They were all abolished. Fair wages were implemented. taxes were reduced because you don't have the same taxes coming in from double taxation and excessive taxation. And the Jews and Christians were actually allowed to participate in even the highest levels of government. So some people criticize that later on, and they say, oh, they shouldn't have allowed them to get so high because there was something going on. But regardless of the criticism, it just shows you that it's proof of what Islam actually did in these regions. Now what's really interesting, Musa wrote to the Khalifa at this time. And he said, now Khalifa, who's the Khalifa? Al-Walid, right? He said, allow me to go through Constantinople via Europe, and I'm going to meet you back in Damascus. Allow me to cross this entire region. So let's take a look at the map. So Muslims taking almost the entire region of Spain, crossing up here by this region, southern France. So he's saying now, allow me, where's the Khalifa? He's in Damascus over here. He said, allow me to go through here, this region, get Constantinople, and then I'll meet you back in Damascus. If we could simply conquer this entire region, the Roman Empire is finished. So let me go through. Now, in reality, if he had, Allah knows best, but if he had the opportunity, perhaps it would have actually been a lot easier to go through this region, because the Roman Empire was not expecting ever that the Muslims would be going around the back. The whole time, they've been coming through this region, because this is where their main land is. They never expected to go. So imagine if he went from here, and another Muslim army went from here, they would be stuck in between, and this would be a major disaster for the Roman Empire. But Allah decrees what He wills, and this was not, decided to be. So what happened? What happened was the Khalifa Al-Walid becomes sick. So he calls back Musa ibn Nusayr, and he calls back Tariq ibn Ziyad, and he says, I want you guys to come here right now, because there's internal political turmoil all the way in Damascus. So now Musa has a choice now, right? What are the two options? Option number one, I'm so powerful. I control this entire northern region of Africa and the entire region of Spain and all the way here. Now the Khalifa is sick and he's calling me back, and this doesn't even make any sense. I'm all the way up here and everything is going perfect right now. This is the best time. Two options. Option number one, listen to the leader and go back. Option number two, rebel against the leader and declare your own Khalifa. Declare yourself as the Khalifa. Alright? So I'm just going to leave it at, if you were in his position, what would you do? What did he do? He went back. He went back. But we're going to see what the consequences of him going back are. So he decides to go back. He complies with the order. So Al-Walid becomes ill. Why is there a power struggle? His own son, he wants to appoint his own son as the Khalifa. Why is he not allowed to do this? Because Sulaiman had already been appointed by the previous Khalifa earlier. So the previous Khalifa said, I'm appointing two people. First Walid, and then Sulaiman. So now Walid gets this idea, he says, no, I want to appoint my own son. I don't want to let this Sulaiman guy, become the Khalifa. For whatever reason he had. So he called him back, he said, we gotta call all the powerful people back, and we gotta, Musa is a very powerful guy, he can help me, he can support me, get my own son in, or whatever else he had in mind. Right? So he made it all the way back, traveled back. So Sulaiman ibn Abdul Malik becomes the new Khalifa. And he stops Walid's son from becoming the Khalifa. Now what are the ramifications of this political maneuver? What happens is, Sulaiman now is the new Khalifa, and he almost got ousted. He almost didn't become the Khalifa because the previous one wanted his own son to take over. So this made him really angry, it made him really upset, and he started taking revenge against anyone who had full loyalty with Walid. Because what happened was, all these other governors, they were supporting Walid. So he says, you know what, if they're going to support him in all his decisions, including not making me the Khalifa and making the child a Khalifa, his own son a Khalifa, then they went against they disrespected me. So this guy comes in and starts a vengeance campaign, political vengeance campaign. So what does he do? He calls back Muhammad ibn al-Qasim as well. So Muhammad ibn al-Qasim is all the way on the other side. And Musa ibn Nusayr is all the way over there. And the guy in the north is who? Central Asia? Qutayba ibn Muslim, right? So Qutayba ibn Muslim is also called back. All these guys are being called back. So these are like the three, really genius commanders, done so much for the Muslim world, and now they're all being called back because of some political rivalry over here. So what happens to Muhammad ibn al-Qasim? He's called back and he's put into prison. Why is he put into prison? Because Sulaiman had a problem with Hajjaj. He hated Hajjaj. Not because Hajjaj was such a bad guy, but he had like a personal issue with him. But Hajjaj already died by this time. So what does Sulaiman decide? He says, we're going to get all of Hajjaj's family. And Muhammad ibn al-Qasim is part of Hajjaj's family. So he calls him all the way back from, Punjab region, and he makes him come back and he throws him into prison. Throws him into prison, and he ends up getting him killed. So Muhammad ibn al-Qasim at that time, such a young leader, had so much potential, is killed. Before he left, his people told him the same. His people told him, you're so popular over here. Everybody loves you in this whole region of Pakistan, Afghanistan area. Don't go back to this guy. This guy's calling you back and he doesn't look like he has good intentions. Declare yourself the Khalifa. But Muhammad ibn al-Qasim decides, no, we're going to maintain unity. We're going to go back. And again, I ask you the same question, what would you do? Right? It's easy to say, yeah, I would stay. And if you stay and you look at a rebellious time, you see how much fitna that caused. And if you go back, you see that there's also a problem. It's a very difficult decision. So he decides to go back. He's imprisoned. He ends up getting killed. Musa ibn Nusayr comes back. Musa ibn Nusayr comes back from Spain. What happens? He's imprisoned. He's stripped of his rank as governor. He's charged with some ludicrous charges, and he has to pay all these fines for doing something. He didn't do anything, right? So he thought that, he's going to get, honored, obviously, because of all that he's done. Everybody loves him. He's been doing so many good things. Instead, he got this revenge on him. So he lost his rank. He lost his money. He lived out the rest of his life in poverty outside of Medina, just staying with the scholars and just living out his life at that point in time. What did this do? And also, even Qutayba ibn Muslim, he was also punished in some way. So what did this do? All the efficient military Muslim commanders, what kind of message does this send to them? We're not going to, if we do something good, this is what's going to happen to us. Because either there's a power struggle, or there's a personal vengeance, or this guy thinks we became too strong, or whatever it is. So you know what? We should be more careful, we should be more cautious of going in, doing too many heroic things or too many good things. So this is a really big problem when you have a corrupt leader, when you have a problematic leader. So, but things get better, and things get worse, and then things come back, and they get better again. So in the year 98, what does he do? He goes and he besieges Constantinople. So he actually does something, pretty decent. He goes and sieges Constantinople, which is the capital of the Roman Empire. And again, they've never been able to take Constantinople. The Romans are there. They see that the Muslims, before this, the Muslims were having a lot of problems. They were taking a lot of territory back. So there was a siege of Constantinople. The Romans launched a counterattack from Sicily. Siqilia, from Sicily, which is part of Italy. And the Muslims repulsed that attack, and they sailed over to Sicily, and they captured the island of Sicily, which is in Italy. So now Muslims are in Italy, they're in France, they're in Spain. We're talking about, and Portugal. We're talking about 4 places in Europe that Muslims are in at this time. So now Muslims are still in Constantinople, sieging the place. They can't get anywhere because Constantinople is one of the heaviest, best, just the location is just so ideal for a place to be, as we talked about before. So all of this is going on. And Sulaiman, this new Khalifa who, messed up these generals and everything else, all the, advances that the Muslims had done, they're kind of starting to lose a little bit of that region, that territory. He decides at the end of his life that he wants to do something that's going to make up for some of the mistakes that he's made in his life. People change sometimes at the end of their life. He's nearing death, and he says, you know what, now that I'm going, I'm going to do something that, inshallah, hopefully Allah is going to be pleased with me. At least I'll throw some really good deed out there. So what does he do? He decides to break from tradition, and he's not appointing his own children, or he's not appointing someone really, really close to him. He goes and he decides instead to appoint a distant relative. So I'm going to appoint somebody good. It doesn't have to be the one who's supposed to be next in line. I'm going to break from this and I'm going to appoint somebody who's a little bit better. But then he's apprehensive. And he says, what if people don't accept from me? They're not used to this whole thing going on. So he takes a sealed, he puts his decision in an envelope and he seals the envelope. And he says, now go out to the people and tell them that they have to pledge, that they're going to pledge that this guy is the next Khalifa. So some people started refusing. They said, no, we're not going to, you may be the Khalifa, we'll accept what you say, but we're not going to accept some closed envelope like this. You don't have that level of authority. So being the guy that he is, he basically put the sword at everybody who opposed, and he said, either you're going to accept it or you're going to die. So this was probably the only decent move he ever made. So everyone accepted. Okay, we will accept this person who's mentioned in the envelope. So when he died, when Sulaiman died, they opened up the envelope and they said, let's see who the next guy is. And the next guy happened to be Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, the guy who was the governor of Medina, someone who is considered to be generally more righteous than the other people, but he was not an amazing person at this time. He's not like the greatest of people, right? While he's governor or something like that, he's still an Umayyad. He's living a luxurious life, wearing really nice clothes, very wealthy person and everything. So keep all that in mind. So then he's decided that he's going to be the next Khalifa. So Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, the son of Ibn Marwan, and from his, he was also a relative, the great grandson of Umar ibn al-Khattab. Okay, it says grandmother, but actually someone explained to me that it was from the son's daughter's side going down. Okay, so he is from the line of Umar as well. Probably there's some kind of connection in that, he feels that he has a responsibility. But he grew up in Medina. So he grew up in Medina. He grew up around scholars. So he was a pretty well-raised person. He was governor of Medina for a decade. He was governor of Egypt for a decade as well. Okay. He was known as Umar II. Why is he known as Umar II? Because the first one, was the second Khalifa, and he resembled the first one in his behavior, and his attitude, and his style of governance. So we're going to take a look at some of the things that he had. When he accepted the Khalifa, the first thing that he said was, he made an announcement, and he said, "O people, the responsibility for the Khalifa has been thrust upon me without my desire or your consent, without your real consent. If you choose to elect someone else, I will step aside and I will support your decision." So this is the way he began. Now this is not the way that a normal person who's being appointed by the family member of the Umayyad clan is going to behave. So he's trying to re-establish from the beginning the style of the first Khulafa, or the first Caliphs, who are known as the righteous or the just ones. So the Umayyads, they realized this guy is something special. So they let him remain, and they say, no, you're one of us and you're a good person. Let's have some, let's see what he can do. We've tried all the other tactics, we've tried other people, let's try him. So he actually became he was like a breath of fresh air for people, because people kind of were really sick and tired of the other leaders just ruling at their whims and acting like kings and all of that, like emperors almost. So what he did was, one of the first and most important things that he did was, he re-established accountability for leaders. And that's very important, because the accountability of the leaders in the Umayyads was going. It was going down and down and down. He re-established it. Now how did he start that process? He began with himself. And that's one of the most important lessons. So if you come and you say, I'm going to change things up and everyone's going to be held accountable, it's easy to talk and it's easy to say things like that. But to actually implement it, you should start with yourself. So whenever we see all these politicians coming in and making all these claims, and we're going to do this, we're going to do that, and then they never do anything. And then they say, another one comes and says, no, I'm going to do this and that, and he doesn't really do anything, because you have to start with yourself. So what did he do? He was living a very lavish lifestyle. This is just, don't get the wrong idea. This is not some guy who's an ascetic, very, simple guy coming in and all of a sudden taking over. He was a good guy, but he was not like the greatest or most amazing people. But the moment he became Khalifa, he just got this idea that he has this huge responsibility now in front of the Muslim Ummah and in front of Allah. So he decides to change his entire lifestyle. And he says, this is going to be a reign of accountability. And we're going to start with me. So he gave up his own lifestyle. He started giving away many of his luxuries. Chose to live like almost an ascetic life, like Umar ibn al-Khattab. He chose not to live in the palace. So the people, all of his predecessor, the family members were living in the palace. So these people said, look, it's your turn to go and live in the palace. He's like, no. The family's already there. You don't want to kick a family out. There's women and there's children. Let them live in the palace. I'm going to live somewhere else. So he didn't even live in the palace. He said, I don't need to live there. And he began by telling all his family members, including himself, that they need to return all the properties that they had acquired through their political rule back to the public treasury. So what used to happen is sometimes around this time, when the Umayyads would take some territory, they would also assign it to their own royal family or to the governors or whatever it is, so it became personal property. He said, all of that is going back into the Muslim treasury. None of this belongs to us in the first place. Then he even made his own wife return all the jewelry that she acquired since they've been in a position of authority. So all of that needs to go back into the public treasury. Now, why his wife? Right? Because his wife only got those special jewels and whatever, all the stuff that they got was because of their political position. He was a governor of Medina, he was a governor of Egypt. So they're getting gifts left and right here and there. He said all of it needs to go back. Now somebody may say that, that's so harsh, making his wife do that and this and that. The thing is, after Umar passed away, his wife outlived him. They asked his wife, they said, we would like to give you, we know he was very strict, so we would like to give you all those jewels that you put in the public treasury, we'd like to give them back to you. And she says that somebody who willingly put them in the public treasury has no authority to take from the public treasury what doesn't belong to her. Meaning she actually willingly did it as well. It's not like it's just her being forced. So she realized, anyway, so he puts all that stuff back into the treasury. So what are some of the things that Umar did? He did so many things. We can only talk about a few things. He abolished the practice of receiving gifts as favors. So he went back and he made this strict policy that no one is receiving any gifts. Because receiving a gift, it's allowed in Islam. But secretly, the gift would eventually lead to a favor. Right? And we have the same thing, even though we pride ourselves on such a great system and we don't have so much high-level corruption, or we have we have high-level corruption but not middle-level corruption. Let's just take United States of America. Are politicians allowed to receive gifts? Yeah, for their campaign contributions, absolutely. They get gifts from the healthcare industry. They used to get gifts from the tobacco company. They get gifts from other places. They're allowed. They get gifts all the time, but it's called towards their campaign or whatever it is. It happens everywhere. So they say, it's somebody gives you a gift. What are you going to do? It's not nice to refuse. Blah blah blah. And what happens? That spirals out of control. And eventually, when you get a gift, and they say, hey, we give you all these gifts. You think you're not going to return the favor? You need to return the favor. So this is a precaution which some people will say it's too tough, right? You can't receive a small gift from somebody. But for this time, certain times in history where it's absolutely needed to be tougher. And Umar realized this is one of those times. So he absolutely abolished this idea of receiving gifts. No one else is going to receive gifts. So people have this idea that Umar ibn Abdul Aziz was a soft leader or something like that. He was not a soft leader. He was a tough leader, but he was tough but just. And that's what was really needed at this time. So he started removing all the governors who were like Hajjaj. Anyone who had this idea, remember Hajjaj has this idea of, we're going to take care of the situation by any means necessary, and the ends justify the means. Whatever it takes to bring unity, smash a rebellion down, whatever it is, we're going to do it. So he removed all those people and he said, we need justice, we need just leaders. The governor of Khorasan is just one of the examples. Among the first people he removed was the governor of the entire region of Khorasan, which is a very important region, Central Asia, right? So he was among the people. What did he do with him? He imprisoned him for what? For misappropriating taxes. So this guy was not giving the proper taxes over to the Muslim treasury, or he was spending it in his own way. You don't just get off the hook with the sorry during Umar's time. You're going to go to prison and you're going to have to suffer for your mismanagement. So what did Umar do? Among the things he did was, he called back the Muslim army which was in Constantinople. Now why did he call them back? Constantinople would have probably, Allah knows best, but if they stayed there for another year, Constantinople might have actually fallen to the Muslims, because they were in a very good position at this time. Expansion to Central Asia, into India, into Spain. Things are going very good at this time. But Umar decided priority should be given to internal reforms. Even though it's expanding, if you don't reform from the inside, it's going to become corrupt and it's going to disintegrate. But that doesn't mean that he didn't do anything else politically. So he dealt with a lot of things. He suppressed rebellions which were taking place in Azerbaijan. He fought against the Romans. He sent an army to help the Muslims in Spain. He did a lot of political things, but he realized priorities. So he began with internal reforms first. But he did not limit himself to internal reforms, but he continued the process of what was going on before him as well. Among the other things he did was, some of the territories which accepted Islam, and the people, they said, yes, we're Muslims, and they declared themselves as Muslims, they were still having to pay the jizya, or the poll tax. Now if you're Muslim, you don't need to pay the poll tax. Why would you be paying the poll tax? So the governors made the excuse at that time before him, that we don't believe that they sincerely accepted Islam. So they don't look like they're real Muslims, therefore we're going to charge them the tax anyways. Even if they claim to be Muslim or they're praying or whatever, we're going to charge them anyways. So he got rid of that and he made official policy. Official policy was that anyone who declares that they're Muslim and they pray like a Muslim, that person is declared a Muslim and he cannot be charged any type of poll tax. So a lot of Western authors, and you need to be very careful about this, a lot of Western authors, Oxford, Karen Armstrong, a lot of people, they put the charge against Umar and says that production decreased and the treasury became bankrupt because of his internal policies of spending money in public works and all of that. But if you look at other books, like actual Muslim history books, this is just like a shot in the dark. They're saying, oh well, obviously if you spend so much money internally, then you're going to be losing up all the income of the treasury and all of that. But in reality, no, because he was making sure that the money is being distributed to the right places. So if you look at Ibn Kathir in Bidayah wa Nihaya, he explains just in Persia alone, which was one of the most important regions, Iran, Iraq, this area, just in Persia alone during his time, the revenue increased from 28 million dirhams to 124 million dirhams. And that's with all the public expenditures on scholars, on the poor, on public works that he's performing. So it shows you that this charge is not a very strong charge. And you need to be careful about that. What else did Umar do? Umar sent emissaries to China and Tibet with letters, just like the Prophet, peace be upon him, did, inviting them to Islam. So rather than just, only do military, this all the way in China, we're not going to be able to reach there right now. Tibet, we're not going to reach that area. So instead, let's send them a letter, just like the Prophet, peace be upon him, did, inviting them to Islam and see what their response is going to be. During his time, many people who were Persians, Indians and Egyptians had not yet accepted Islam, although they were living under the Muslim state. So during his time, a lot of people entered into Islam because they saw this level of justice. They saw this level of justice and they saw all the benefits of being Muslim here. He put stipends for teachers. He encouraged education. A few things that are not in the notes. So you have important things taking place. The hadith, for the first time, officially was codified. So the first codifications of hadith were done during his time. Imam al-Zuhri was commissioned to actually document hadith in detail on a state level. And scholars of hadith were documenting and were compiling all the hadith collections 100 years before Imam Bukhari and Imam Muslim during this time. So scholarship was very strong during his time. Zakah was being dispensed on a very fair measure and was being collected properly poverty was eradicated in most areas. And one of the interesting things that he did was, he started this practice of ending the khutbah with verse from the Quran, chapter 16, verse 90, which says, إِنَّ اللَّهَ يَأْمُرُ بِالْعَدْلِ وَالْإِحْسَانِ Indeed, Allah orders justice and good conduct, and giving to relatives, and forbids immorality and bad conduct and oppression. He admonishes you that perhaps you will be reminded. So that verse actually came during his time, so that he could have everyone giving the same khutbah, reminding them about the importance of justice, the importance of justice. And it's something that many khatibs still do, during their khutbahs. Also, he treated the Banu Hashim, the Hashim clan, from the family of the Prophet, peace be upon him, he treated them with special respect. Some of the Umayyad leaders would not treat them very well, and that's what would lead to a lot of uprisings. And saying that, one of the people from the family of the Prophet, they should be in charge, and they should become the Khalifa. So a lot of uprisings happened because there was some tension between the Umayyad clan and the rivalry. So he treated them with dignity, and that's why you didn't really have any major revolts during his time. He tried to reconcile with the Khawarij. So instead of just fighting them, he invited them for public debates and fair debates. And he started debating with them, and he had some of the scholars debate with them. So one time, 2 major Khawarij leaders came in and debated, and one of them ended up leaving the Khawarij and accepting, and the other one went back safely, unharmed, who didn't accept. So it shows you a very different policy. So this is what we consider Islamically to be a golden age. Alright, so we're going to talk about another golden age and explain what that means, but in reality, from the faith perspective, from an Islamic perspective, this is a real golden era when justice is being propagated throughout the entire region, and Islam is being practiced properly, education is advancing, all of these things. This is the best example. So even though he was poisoned, and he was killed only 2.5 years of being leader, he still accomplished so much, and he created this revolution in the entire region, realigning the entire area, the entire Muslim world back with the principles of Islam. So this is a great example for everyone. When they get, think about all the people before him who are getting stressed out and saying, our leaders are bad, our leaders are corrupt, and there's no hope, and I can't believe this is happening, and why is Allah allowing this to happen? If they would just have a little bit more patience, they would have seen, here's a perfect example and role model of how things can go good. And this is what we mean in the beginning. I mentioned first, the notes began with the verse of the Quran. Does anyone remember what the verse of the Quran is? That's the title of the notes. The rightly guy. What is the first verse of the Quran that the notes begin with? These are the days that we change. We change back and forth. These are the days we change back and forth between people. There are good days, meaning periods of time, and there are bad periods of time. So nobody should ever get depressed, get distressed, and think, everything is lost. Can you imagine, during the time of Sulaiman, imagine Muhammad ibn al-Qasim being imprisoned and being killed. Musa ibn Nusayr losing his position, becoming poor, losing his rank, and ending up, retiring an old man as in poverty. All of the things that they've done. Tariq ibn Ziyad being punished. All of that, but what does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala do? He sends people who give hope. And Umar ibn Abdul Aziz is a perfect example of people to take hope from when they think that things are really, really bad at that time. Okay, so let's take a look at the Muslim world during the Umayyad period. We're talking about this region. This is probably one of the world's largest empire, if not the largest empire, in terms of just think about how long it takes to travel from up here all the way through this entire region, all the way to get down to the entire area of China. That's a very long journey. But the fact that there was unity for most periods means a lot of things. It means, number one, people are freely traveling through this entire region without being, they're able to travel. Even though there's some rivalries and some people, rebellion here, rebellion there, generally people can travel across this entire region. Which means what? It means the exchange of ideas. It means the exchange of cultures. It means that, this is something that people have really never seen at this level. There's always been rivalries and petty things and all of that. So this is a huge, huge accomplishment, and this is where Islam is at this point in time. So now we're going to move quickly through part of the Abbasid period. Okay, now remember, the Abbasid period is just referring to the people who are in power at this point in time. So what happened was, within 2 decades after Umar, other Khalifas came. Some were bad, some were okay, some were not too bad. But there was a lot of discontent among people, and they started getting upset with the Umayyads, and they said, these guys are not just leaders, and there's a little bit of, a racism, family, tribal thing going on. So people started getting sick and tired of them. So what happened was that one of the grandsons of the Prophet's uncle, Abbas, who's we studied his life in the Life of the Prophet class, he started getting support from the local population. So people started, accepting him as kind of like a leader, and he was calling for reforms. So he's saying, these Umayyads are a problem, but he's coming from the family of Abbas. That's why we got the Abbasids. So what did he establish? He established an underground network of support rebelling against the Umayyad Empire for 10 years before anything else happened. So for 10 years, there's this network of propaganda taking place underneath, saying the Umayyads gotta go. And we gotta get rid of this entire family, and we need to replace them with somebody else who has authority, and we need to have a new Khalifa, but not just a new Khalifa, we need to have a whole new family. This family of the Umayyads needs to be finished completely. So let's get rid of them. So he managed to get a lot of support, especially in Central Asia. That's why Central Asia became a very important region again. So from the year 740 to 750, this rebel movement basically was brewing, but underground. So this time they didn't just come out in the open, because they would probably get crushed. So they decided, we're going to go ahead and plan this underground. One of the important people who was involved in this, his name was Abu Muslim al-Khurasani. Guess where he was from? Khurasan, that's right. So Abu Muslim al-Khurasani, he's a Persian. And he's a key figure in this revolution. He's a very important personality, and he started, all this, propaganda campaigns. When we say propaganda, I mean it's an idea, right? And he's starting this idea that, we need to replace them with a new leader. So within a few years, they took over the city of Merv. Merv was was a very important city in Persia. And within a few years after that, or a little bit time after that, they took the entire region of Khurasan, which is a very large region. Khurasan is not just a city, it's a region. So they took over the entire region of Khurasan. So now you have this movement, right? And what is the movement claiming? The movement is making the claim that the Umayyads are not legitimate leaders. Number one, they have no connection to the Prophet, peace be upon him. So that's a great claim, because the people who were competing for power were mainly the Umayyads. Who are the people who are rebelling, basically? You have the Umayyads, who are the Khalifas right now. You have the people who were supporting the family of the Prophet, like the people who supported Hussein, the people who supported Ali in the beginning. Right? So they're saying that we should be from the family of the Prophet. And then you have people who are the Khawarij. Now the Khawarij or the Kharijites, they're very democratic kind of people. So from one perspective, they look very good. You know what? No one, it doesn't matter who you are, where you're from, the Khalifa should be from any social class, any type of class. So it looks very good. But the problem is, they're really extremists in their views, and they start going and killing people who don't agree with them. So that's the problem with the Khawarij, even though, on this point, they might have actually been okay on this point. But the other points, they're really problematic. So these are the people who have some kind of claim to power. So now the Abbasids, what happened was, this is a Persian, right? Abu Muslim is a Persian. How in the world is he going to have some kind of authority to say that, he's not an Umayyad, and he's not from the family of the Prophet. So something happened, it's a long story of what happened, but somehow they got a connection to the family of Abbas. And Abbas was the uncle of the Prophet, peace be upon him. So now he's saying, technically we're from the family, not directly from the family. We're not from, Hassan or Hussein or something like that. But we're still from the Abbas side. So we're from the Banu Hashim side. So they managed to get the support of the people who said that the family of the Prophet, peace be upon him, should be in power as well. So what are they claiming? They're claiming, number one, we have a closer connection to the Prophet. Number two, we are consisting of many Persians and Central Asians, and we're tired of this Arab supremacy that the Umayyads have. So we're going to bring egalitarianism across the board. So we're going to reform, we're going to change things up, and we're going to make it, better. So this movement starts to spread, and particularly in the eastern region and in Central Asia. So they take over Khorasan, they take over these other regions. Once the revolution was pretty much on the move, they declared this guy named Abu al-Abbas as-Saffah. He became the Khalifa. So they declared him to be the Khalifa, and now there's another Khalifa in Damascus, which is about to, be removed. So Saffah takes charge. He goes and he starts fighting with the Umayyad family, and he manages to take every single region from the Umayyads. Takes Syria, he takes Arabia, he takes Egypt, he takes every single region. And what he does is, this is one of the problems. So everything is promised, everything's looking good. What he does is, he goes and he kills the entire Umayyad family. Like every single one of them who could potentially serve in a position of power. So all the princes, all the people who would have been in line, he says, we don't want to deal with these guys anymore ever again. He wipes all of them out, except one. Only one guy manages to escape. Okay, other than that, the Umayyad family or the Umayyad dynasty in terms of leadership is finished. Except the one guy who survived. And guess what he did? A few years later, he made it traveled all the way to Spain, and he set himself up as the leader, and he became another Umayyad Khalifa in the year 756. Whereas the Abbasids took power in 750. So 6 years later, he set himself up as the Khalifa. So now you have the Umayyads in Spain, and Morocco and that region, and you're going to have the Abbasids in the year 750. We're switching dates here, 132 or whatever it is, in the rest of the Muslim world, outside of Spain. Okay? So we have a new dynasty. We have a new group of people, the Abbasids. So the Abbasids are the new Khalifas. So they set up this new power system. They transfer the capital of the Muslim world from Damascus to Kufa. Okay, so they transfer it to Kufa, and then after Kufa, they build the city of Baghdad. The city of Baghdad did not exist. So they built the city of Baghdad, and that became the new capital of the Khalifa or the Khilafah of the Abbasids. So one thing about the Abbasids is they started giving themselves titles. So this is an interesting thing. So every single one of them had a title, and the title represented that they had some kind of support from Allah. So you have a guy named Al-Mansur, for example. Mansur means someone who's been helped, meaning Allah has helped me. So the guy's his nickname is Al-Mansur. Another guy's name is Al-Mahdi, meaning that he's guided. This is, I guided from Allah. Another guy is Al-Muntasir. This guy is, Mu'tasim is another one. Yeah, Mustansir, being helped by Allah. Or, somebody taking over. Or, all these different, every single one of them had like a different title. Probably near the end, Abbasids lasted for a very long time. Probably took, at least a few days to come up with like a title once at the end if everyone used almost all the titles. But that's what they did. So their promise was to treat everyone equally, not favor any class of people or something like that. In reality, they were a lot more fair in terms of allowing all sorts of people, not just from the Abbasid clans or something like that. They were a lot more fair in terms of allowing more Persians and more this and more that, a lot more than the Umayyads. Well, the Umayyads were a little bit more, protective of that case. But the problem was, some of the problems with them was the culture in Baghdad. So once they built their court and they established themselves, keep in mind, Baghdad was near the city of Ctesiphon, Madain. And what was Madain? What was Ctesiphon? Persian capital, right? So remember what the Persian civilization was like in the pomp and the grandeur and all the gold and all that stuff. So the problem with the Abbasid leaders at this time was they started following in the same footsteps. So from the outward aspect, if you looked at the Persians, or if you looked at the Romans or something like that, and you look at how they're building giant palaces and they have thrones and gold here and gold there and all of that stuff, they have the same thing. So someone may look at it from the outward aspect and say, you know what did Islam do really? It looks like another, group of like kings or, pashas or whatever it is. They just came and just took over and they're living the same lifestyle and they're doing the same thing. But if you look at it a little bit deeper, there's a world of difference between the two. Even though the upper class or the rulers are leading this extremely luxurious life and all of that, if you compare the way the average person and as well as the leaders were living their lives generally, how Islam affected them, it makes everything completely different in terms of the way that it was being practiced, even though you have luxury. So the problem was luxury among the ruling class, excessive luxury. That resembles exactly like the Persian Empire or the Roman Empire. But that's where the similarities end. And what else was going on? If you look at Islam, what happens in Islam, right? If you look at the Persian Empire, how it was, you look at the Roman Empire, how it was, people would be bowing down to the Caesar, right? People would be worshipping fire. There would be social classes and there would be this and there would be that. Even though the rulers had this, keeping themselves away from the community, living this luxurious life, they still had to pray, right? And when they had to pray, did they just pray inside their palace? No. They had to go inside the masjid, they had to pray. They had to pray with other people there. They had to pray side by side, so other royal family members have to pray with all the other people who are going to be standing up there. They have to go for Jummah. They have to listen to a khutbah. Even if the Khalifa is giving one khutbah, someone else has to give a khutbah somewhere else. So Islam did make a huge change. So some people, when they look at it, they'll say, well, outwardly it looks like it's the same thing. It's not the same thing. Even if you're insincere, even if you're a hypocrite inside, even if, let's say, these leaders were hypocrites, which not all of them were, by the way, but let's just assume that they were, for the sake of argument. You still have to put on a show for Islam. You still have to put your forehead down on the ground in front of Allah. You still have to abstain from drinking and certain type of things. You still have to have a certain type of behavior even if you're putting on a show because everyone else is Muslim around you. So this makes a world of difference. Islam keeps people in check even if it doesn't restrict their luxuries or their luxurious living. Right? So that's one thing that Allah chose not to do. He did not specifically say that a Muslim is not allowed to possess this much wealth. Now why did Allah not do that? Someone may say, well, all these kings would have been stuck in their tracks. Allah has a wisdom for that. There's a wisdom. He did not want to restrict that because whatever wisdoms you can come up with. Some people have so much wealth and they're able to give more of that wealth. Had they not had that wealth, maybe the wealth would not be redistributed in the same way. So Allah knows best, whatever the wisdom may be. So there's outward similarities, but in reality, Islam had made huge changes. So even though there were some major problems among the leadership in terms of sometimes there was, some tyrannical leaders or something like that. Generally, especially in the beginning period of the Abbasids, they were a political and an economic success. So let us take a look at some of the things that they did. What really happened? The leader represented bringing military security for the entire empire, for the entire region. And the people, now that they have security in that sense, they can actually prosper. So trading is going on, cultural development is going on, people are learning, scholarship is increasing. And if you look at the 5th Khalifa in particular, Harun al-Rashid, he's a very famous one. So we'll talk a little bit about him. This was basically when the Abbasids were at their peak in terms of civilization. Right? So there's a lot more I would like to say about the idea of civilization, but I'm not going to get too much into it. Remember that civilization is measured by a materialistic civilization as material progress. And that's why this is considered to be the golden age, because this was the age of primarily material progress. But in Islam, we measure civilization or we measure success by spiritual or religious success first. And then if the material progress happens to be there, that's also great. But we have to keep in mind that the real golden age for Muslims is not this golden age. The real golden age was the earliest period of Islam when there was justice, when there was a just rule, there were righteous leaders, or Umar ibn Abdul Aziz during that time. That's the real golden age. But this you can say from a more physical perspective or materialistic perspective, this is also a golden age. And Muslim scholars are flourishing at this time, even in the Islamic sciences. So there is still a lot of good during this time. So let's say what happened during the time of Harun al-Rashid. There was a lot of peace. It was a time of peace and unity. Outside of the region of Spain, the Abbasids had the entire region in check. Whatever small rebellions may have cropped up here and there, they were already crushed, and almost everything was consistent across the board. So during this time, people would generally be living peaceful, undisturbed lives, because there's not too much political stuff going on. Why? Because they realized that, you know what? The Abbasids are extremely powerful. We've seen what happened in history. Now is not the time to fight back. We don't have the resources to fight back. Let's at least advance something. Let's at least live in a little bit of time of peace. So this Harun inspired a cultural renaissance, because he was a learned man. He grew up around scholars as well. He had a respect for scholarship. He had a respect for art. He had a respect for education, mathematics, for sciences and all of that. So he was a patron of the arts, and he used to fund a lot of educational projects. So this is the time where medicine, mathematics, astronomy, poetry, literature, philosophy, Islamic law, hadith, everything flourished during this time. Right? And he reigned for a very long time. This is where a lot of things happen. So, for example, this is the time where all the medical and the philosophical texts from the Greek civilization were being translated. They were written in Syriac and Greek, and they were translated into Arabic. So what the Muslims were doing is, while they were translating, they were learning, and while they were learning, they started developing upon the ideas. So they were criticizing and saying, these ideas are good, these ideas work, these ideas, they're useless, we're not going to use them. So for example, some ideas were thrown out and some ideas were taken in and adapted and modified. So this is a time where Muslims, according to one Western scholar, Muslim scholars had more scientific discoveries in this period than in the whole of previous recorded history. Not Muslim history, world history. In this period, there have been more scientific advancement than in the entire history of the world that we know of. That's how much advancement there was in terms of discoveries and advancement, experiments and all of that. So everything is going great in this time. The only problem during this time is the political leaders, that they're living a very lavish life. That's the only main issue that's going on. So if they were more in line with Islamic principles in leadership, this would be the ideal time throughout history. But what did the Muslim scholars do and the religious reformers? At this time, they started accepting the Abbasid rule, because they kind of made this compromise. They said, you know what, all these rebellions and all of these things, this is a time where, these are not the ideal rulers, they're not the ideal leaders, but it's in our best interest and it's pragmatic to accept these people because they're not that bad, and we could do so much more rather than fighting against them all the time. We could actually live under them even though they're not ideal, and we could accomplish a lot more. So Islam has an aspect of pragmatism to it. It's not a defeatist religion, but it has an aspect of being pragmatic and understanding the reality of the situation. So they kind of felt that this is like a treaty of Hudaybiyah. It's kind of like a compromise. Sure, the Khalifa should not have that much wealth. And he should not consider that the public treasury, he could take whatever he wants from it. That's a major problem, and the scholars knew that. But at the same time, what are we going to do? Everyone should just get together and fight against this entire region? This is not the time for it. So they kind of made a little compromise. What happened was, during the same time, Islamic law became very popular, and it was being put into different books. So it was being developed in the sense that several volume books were being written. So you have pioneering scholars like Imam Abu Hanifa. You have in Kufa. You have pioneering scholars like Imam Malik in Medina, either teaching or writing books, and they were developing this fiqh. Now what ended up happening was, the more you develop the fiqh and the more it becomes popular among people, that it becomes accessible, it becomes popular, it becomes a profession that's respected, the more that's going to transfer power from the leaders over to the scholars. Because the scholars now can easily define what is right and wrong, not just in a sermon, but in a technical sense. that, this is where your power stops. And this is the power that you have, and you're allowed to do this. But if there's a problem, if there's a lawsuit, if there's a court case, we're the ones who are going to determine how the law is going to be implemented in the society. So now you see a shift of power taking place, despite the fact that these were people these leaders tried to wield a lot of power during this time. So you have a balance of authority almost, kind of shifting here. And also, emphasizing study of Islamic law or study of hadith is obviously going to transform society. This is where you find lots of Muslim study circles. And you have to keep one very important thing in mind, which I didn't, put in the notes. I read it a little bit later. It's a very important point. Now that the Muslims learned how to make paper from the Chinese, and you're able to freely travel all the way around. By the way, Muslims were also traveling through Spain. Even though the Umayyads were in Spain, anyone from the Abbasid region can travel into Umayyad Spain because they're still Muslim at the end of the day. Even though they're kind of rival dynasties, it's not like, you're coming from the Abbasid land, you're not allowed to come in. They would travel through and they would travel back. So in the end of the day, even though there was some power struggle, from the perspective of the entire Muslim world, any Muslim could go and travel. And you find all these travelers writing these books, traveling through and writing, I traveled to this land, I traveled to this land, and this is what I saw, and this is what I saw, traveling through the entire region. So what you have is, with paper and with travel, two very important points. You have the spread of literacy. You have people becoming not only respectful of scholars, people becoming more literate, people going and sitting in the circles of scholars, people who are teaching in the masajid have tens of thousands of students. Not thousands, not a small CIS class, we're talking huge, tens of thousands of students studying under them. So you have this cultural revolution, you have this knowledge revolution, you have the Islamic revolution, all of these things taking place at the same time. And this is way before, they say that in Europe, the printing press caused a printing press revolution. Well, this was the paper revolution that was caused in the Muslim world because of the introduction of paper. Why? Try to understand why. Why does a printing press cause a revolution? Because not everyone has access to the books and the ideas. Why does paper cause a revolution? Because before you had to use paper, you had to use papyrus, or you have to use vellum, or you have to use leather, which is very expensive, and it takes very expensive to pay a scribe to write. So it's knowledge and studying was for the elite because it costs a lot of money to have all those things. With paper, it's so cheap now. Now ideas can be spread to anyone who's literate, and people were all becoming literate. Now they can all have access to all these paper books. So now you see, the world changing at this time. This was a really good time. But what happened was, of course, no good time can ever remain perfect. So what happened was, Harun, when he was passing away, he tried to maintain power by just imagine how much land he's controlling, by the way. It's a huge empire, and it's united under his rule. So he decides that, I'm going to divide the empire up between my two sons to kind of maintain some power, because I don't think either son is that capable of doing what I was doing. So let's have one in charge of this and one in charge of the other one. So it's not a bad idea, but since the sons were not as capable as he was, they fought a civil war with each other over power, and both of them wanted to get power over the other one, and it led to a civil war for 4 years. Okay. See, keep in mind, the civil wars in the past, during the time of the companions, and even after that, during Abdullah ibn Zubair's time and all, you can say the battle for power was a little bit more ideologically motivated. They felt that, this is going to serve the ummah better, or whatever it may be. Now we're talking about purely motivated by power only. It has nothing to do with any type of justification from an Islamic perspective. We just want to, lead. So then we have other Khalifas coming in. Al-Ma'mun was the brother or the son who, took out his brother, and he rose to power. So he realized that this egalitarian spirit that Muslim scholars, were promoting and everything, this is a threat to his way of life. So now people are becoming too educated, Muslim scholars are getting too much power, this is a problem, we need to do something about it. So what does he do? He himself, he was a very intellectual, not capable politician, maybe not the best politician, but he's educated kid, right? Or now he's a Khalifa. He's an educated guy, So he favored this group known as the Mu'tazilite group, with the rationalists. So the Mu'tazilites or the rationalists, they're basically people who put reason over revelation, almost on par with revelation. And we're learning that, in our Thursday class. Whether he was really convinced or not convinced, he decided that he's going to take this policy of the Mu'tazila or the rationalists, and he's going to impose it upon everyone else. Because what he saw, probably, and we can never read the mind of somebody exactly, but when you kind of analyze, probably one of the things that was going through his mind was, these scholars now, too much scholarship, too much, these scholars are wielding too much power. So we need to put them back in their place. So he started what they called the Mihna, or the Inquisition. Not to be confused with the Spanish Inquisition that comes later. Basically, he started persecuting scholars. So he didn't persecute everyone. He didn't persecute the average person in the street or start asking them questions or whatever. He just focused only on the Muslim scholars. And he started persecuting them about one particular thing, where he knew that they're not going to take this position. So the Mu'tazila, they said, with regards to the Quran, that the Quran is created. So the Quran, if you say the Quran is the word of God, right? And you say that it's literally like the word of God, and if God or Allah is not created, because He existed since forever, then His word coming out, are you going to say that His word is also not created, since His words emanate from His being? I know it sounds very, weird and philosophical if you never thought about it. So what happened was, the Muslim scholars were saying, no, the Quran is the word of Allah, and therefore it's also not created, just like Allah, because it's His speech. So it's existed since infinity from that time. The Mu'tazila, they took a new or rationalist perspective, and they said, that doesn't make any sense. You can't say that the Quran is the word of Allah and it's uncreated. It has to be created because it exists in this field. Otherwise, you take a copy of the Quran, you're going to tell me that this has existed since the beginning of time? Or if I recite the Quran, is it existed since the beginning of time? Anyways, and anyone who is not a Mu'tazilite, they tortured him and persecuted him until he admitted that the Quran is created. Now, among the scholars, many of the scholars, they said, okay, this is not such a big deal, right? We don't believe that point, but you know what? You're going to punish me, you're going to torture me for saying the Quran is created? Okay, fine, man. You want to say the Quran is created? Okay, the Quran is created. No big deal. So most of the scholars gave in. Just even though they didn't believe that at all, they just gave in. This is a small point, right? But Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, who's the founder of the Hanbali school of thought, right? Very important school of fiqh, Islamic law. He became a hero in history because of this incident. So he resisted. And he said, there's no way you're going to get me to say this. So when he was put to the test, he said, what do you think? He kept on giving answers which kind of tried to evade the question, and says, yes, no, that's not really exactly, Allah knows best what he means, but he would not answer the question properly. So he got tortured big time. But he became a role model for everyone else. That, this is a person who's not going to give in to somebody trying to, torture him or punish him or whatever it is. So he got tortured a bit, and then he was put under house arrest. So house arrest means that he's not in jail, but he's stuck in his house and no one is supposed to go and learn from him. He's not allowed to spread his teachings. So while he was doing that, he was still writing, he was still doing other things, and people used to go and visit his house, and they would pretend like they're a beggar. Right? The people would come from far, far away, and they would pretend like they're begging, so they would go and ask him for money in the front of his house. And the security guards are watching him, right, from a distance. So it looks like he was, talking to them about, you need this money, and he's giving them some money. Actually, he was teaching them. He's giving them a lesson, while the security guards didn't realize that this was actually a student who came to learn from Imam Ahmad. They said, this guy's very generous. He was generous, but these were people, and they would try to sneak into his house to get lessons from him while he was under house arrest. So we'll leave it at this, and we'll continue the rest of 1,000 years of Islamic history in the following 3 weeks, inshallah ta'ala. Any questions? I don't know exactly, to be honest with you. I haven't looked into what they say. But the thing is, the European scholars of that time, if you want to know what they said, they were just kind of crazy. So they were just these Muslims are devils and they're Satan people and all. So the thing is, what they said usually really didn't have too much weight. They thought the Muslims were idol worshippers. So they thought that Muhammad was an idol, and they thought that, you know what, they're worshipping this idol called Muhammad, therefore they're pagans, and we need to kill the pagans. So we're talking about like really crazy people at that time. Not sure exactly what they have in mind. But I mean, yeah, there probably was. It wouldn't surprise me if a few of these leaders, some of these leaders actually, you know, drunk wine and stuff like that. One of the last leaders, even the Umayyad leaders, he was known for drinking wine. So then people, even his own people got sick and tired of him. They ousted him and they killed him. And they, you know, celebrated. This guy, we finally got rid of this, you know, messed up guy. So there were one or two leaders, or maybe a few leaders here and there who did some of these things. So there was. It's not like it wasn't there. But the thing is, one, it has no basis in Islam. And two, no Muslim looked at that person as an example or role model and said, oh yeah, that's our Khalifa, you know, we should do that. You won't find a single book written by a single scholar that said, hey, well, our Khalifa was going and doing this, so you know what, it must be okay. You'll never find anything like that. Not even a court scholar. Not even a guy working in the palace or something like that. You won't find anyone like that. So the thing is, what basis what does that give you? Nothing. I mean, there's always been people doing something strange. It's the same thing as Saudi women not driving today, right? It's the same. You hear it all the time. Why Saudi women can't drive? Why Saudi women can't drive? Well, you know, they say, well, it must represent Islam because it's Saudi Arabia. I said it's still representing Saudi Arabia. It doesn't represent anything. So so now its argument is wrong from the beginning. So we shouldn't even give in to that type of reasoning. So, well, it's your leader representing. Well, if you put your puppet, leader over our people, you're going to blame us for that too. And sometimes if we get a bad leader on top of us because people are, corrupt at that time, you can't blame Islam or you can't blame everyone else for that. It's not everybody's fault. I mean, if Dan Quayle represented the American people and the guy claimed that he invented the internet, right? That's literally what he said. He said, I invented the internet. I mean, if this guy like that who can't even finish a complete sentence represents the American people, then are we to blame for his stupidity? I mean, we shouldn't be. I don't believe that as an American, George W. Bush represents my level of intelligence. Right? So no one should say, well, because Bush is in power, therefore the guy couldn't spell his own name, whatever it was. So yeah. Okay, so keep in mind, the Shias, remember we talked about it last time. There's the Ismaili Shias who believe in 7 Imams, and then there are the 12er Shias, Ithna Ashari, who believe in 12 Imams. The 12th Imam has not come yet. So there is no such thing as 12er Shiism yet. It doesn't even exist yet. So we're going to see that coming next. The Fatimids are coming next week, so we'll see it inshallah. Shias at this time were basically people who kind of leaned towards supporting that the family of Banu Hashim should get precedence. And technically the Abbasids are somewhat from the family of Banu Hashim, even though they're not directly from the Prophet, peace be upon him. So technically the Abbasids are kind of mixed with the Shia of that time. But we don't even really consider them to be Shia, technically. So the Shia that we discuss are a completely different group of people coming up soon. Yeah, people of extravagance. Now the question is, what is the definition of extravagance? Right? That's all becomes relative. And what I meant was, there's no specific limit on what leaders are allowed to possess. There's no restriction on they can have 100,000 dirhams or 50,000 dirhams or this or that, whatever it is. Their claim is we have the palace because palace is needed for the function of the government and all of that stuff. So I'm not saying that Islam says you can have whatever you want, right? But what I'm saying is there's no clear, defined, specific limit on what somebody can have. That's why it becomes relative and for people to define in their own time. Yeah. Right, exactly. That's what I mean. So he didn't specify it. Right? So it doesn't mean that it's justifying what the people were doing. That wasn't the point. The point was Allah didn't specify that you are allowed to have this many possessions or this many possessions. He just said israf, right? Just being extravagant. So the people were extravagant, but Allah didn't set a limit on what extravagance is. That's why it varies. Otherwise, today someone can say that Americans are extravagant. The fact that I have this in my hand, I'm extravagant. Someone in China will tell me that. It depends on the culture, right? It really depends on the culture. So that's what I meant. I don't mean to justify it. So that's not. Hopefully you didn't get that. Yeah, that's not. Well, saying that driving creates birth defects is not so much corruption to justify the ruler. It's just not good research, right? There's a difference between corruption. So yeah, there probably were some scholars who pandered to the to the Khalifas. But usually the Khalifas didn't have too many court scholars at this time. Usually they had a lot of poets who are praising them and making a lot of poetry praising them, and they had a lot of artists, and they had a lot of other people writing for them or whatever it is. Those were the people who they have entertainers for them. Yeah, they had historians, but the historians they were not too biased. So at this point in time, I don't know of too many people who were really biased towards Caliphs. You have people like Hassan al-Basri standing up to the Khalifas actually, and they were so afraid to even punish a guy like him. So some of the scholars would get killed, some of the scholars would stand up and they couldn't do a thing about it. Like Hassan al-Basri, one of them, was a very strong guy. Later on in history, you do find a lot more court scholars. Like for example, I know particularly in India, under Akbar, you have his court scholars and them, saying a lot of very strange fatwas, supporting his strange views and all of that. So there's a lot of history, in that. Yeah, then you see other scholars. So all the scholars never became corrupt, but there probably are a few that became corrupt, And then technically we don't consider them scholars. They're learned people, they learn, but then they're not real scholars. So they did some interesting stuff, like this guy in India. He wrote an entire tafsir of the Quran with letters, without using any letters that have dots. Now, why in the world would you want to do this? He just did it because he could. He was just really clever. So imagine you have to write an entire book without using ba, ta, tha, jim, kha. You have to figure out a word to use that makes sense without using any sheen, any letters that have any dots. And he did it. He wrote a whole tafsir, right? He wrote a whole tafsir without using any of those letters. What's the point exactly? Whatever point he had, he just wanted to show how intelligent he is. Abu al-Fadl, he wanted to show how intelligent he really is, and he did that. And he's a clever man, but he was kind of like a puppet to the ruler of that time, Akbar and all that. So, khair, may Allah protect us. Inshallah, we'll see you next week. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik. Nastaghfirullah wa natubu ilayk.